basically the model for what a human being is a three-part model. Now, in the old days, I used to, back in the mid-1990s, I did I coordinated a telecourse over at Catonsville, which was the first thing I ever did at CCBC, like 1994. And then the video series that they used for that video course wasn't anywhere near as nice as this one. It was basically one person who was like a talking head, and the lectures they got on television. But then I met them for a really intensive hour-and-a-half review session before each test, and I made up and graded their tests and basically kept in touch with them throughout the course if they had questions or whatever. So in the old days, for the review session, a sixth of the course was on Plato. And I wouldn't apologize for doing Plato, because I think your book gives you that quote from the 20th century mathematician and philosopher Alfred North Whitehead, who said that basically the history of Western philosophy is little more than a series of footnotes to Plato. Now, he was overstating things to make a point, but he does make a legitimate point about the way that Socrates and Plato did philosophy and Aristotle basically set the pattern, for philosophy even down to the present day. So what I used to do is on a blackboard I would draw this diagram out. And so for Plato then, the structure of a human being is a three-part structure, and parts of our soul or human nature are related to different parts of our bodies. Now, for Plato, every human being has this threefold structure. Now, you saw that Aristotle was very controversial looking back on it, because he thought women were less rational than men. But Plato wasn't there. We're going to see that Plato thought that women would be part of the rational ruling class. Now, we just looked at a comment in the video where the guy said, the problem with Plato is he's got to get the rational part about human nature to be reflected in the political part. And so Plato thinks there's not only one form that gives you the makeup, the proper makeup of a human being, and you'll notice that it's similar to Freud, the ego, the superego, and the id. We know for a fact that Freud read Plato because he actually refers to it. However, Freud's classification is a bit different, but he certainly was influenced by Plato's discussion. But for Plato also, there's only one form, there's only one model for an ideal political state. In other words, is there one model for a just form of government, or are there many models? Well, for Plato, the answer would be there's only one, and it's not a democracy. Even though he's writing in Athens, the birthplace of democracy, for him, it's what has been called an aristocracy. Now we know of the use of the term aristocracy to refer to an elite moneyed class of individuals who themselves may or may not be involved in politics. But there is another completely different meaning of the word aristocracy that makes it a form of government where a state is governed by a ruling elite. And even, in our own society, we tend in that direction sometimes. Huge donors can really influence political parties and lobbyists with a lot of money. But also, the aristocrats who structured our government, they had the House down there, and the number of delegates in the House of Representatives is going to change relative to population. But they also, to put a check on that, in England you had the House of Commons, and then you had the House of Lords. Well, our not exact equivalent, but sort of an equivalent of the House of Lords is the Senate, right? Doesn't matter how many people are in a given state, you're only going to have 2 senators, the most elite club. So at any rate, basically for Plato then, there's only one model of an ideal political state, and a statement he makes is that the state, the political state, is nothing more than the individual writ large across the sky. Now, have any of you ever seen a skywriter? That has almost totally gone out of fashion. You almost never see advertising done with skywriting nowadays. But I used to see it sometimes growing up, where they would literally, you'd have several airplanes, and they would spell out something with exhaust smoke or whatever in the sky, and they would literally write something in the sky. Nowadays they just pull a banner. I saw one going by the other day, and you see them all the time when we're having something going on, and they had a baseball game going on yesterday, and I saw one toting a banner about Geico. But for Plato then, the political state is the individual written large across the sky. That is, if an individual person has a threefold makeup, then so a perfect society should have a threefold makeup of 3 different kinds of individuals. And I used to do this. Now, the rest of the slides have to do with the forms and how they relate to the structure of an individual. But I used to do this whole diagram to kind of fit everything together. So for Plato, literally, we have a part of us that has to do with stuff from the stomach on down. And he calls this, the 3 parts of the human psyche or soul are usually referred to as elements, And so there's the appetitive element. This is the part that has to do with our appetites, right? And it sort of corresponds, again, to the stomach and below. And then there is the seat of our emotions, our emotional side. And basically, this is usually referred to as the spirited element. And even today, we have expressions like, somebody had a breast full of courage, Well, that relates all the way back to Plato's view that somehow virtues like courage are displayed in this spirited part of our nature, this emotional part. And then, of course, at the top of everything is the rational element. And we saw in that video, and we're going to see in Science of Polish, that both Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle really emphasize reason as the most important part. But associated with these parts of our nature are various desires, right? With the appetitive element, there's the seat of our desires for food, drink, sexual fulfillment, right? Here, basically, I should have also put that the desires associated with the spirited and emotional part of us also are things like desires for honor and recognition. And then, of course, the philosopher we saw really wants, by his or her reason, to know the forms and to get true knowledge as opposed to just opinion. And of course, your book points out that the head form is goodness itself, or the form of the good. Now, what Plato says is, in a virtuous person, what you have is a person who is not ruled by this part of their nature, or not ruled by the emotional part, but where the rational part keeps the other parts in a sort of an equilibrium. So we saw in Heraclitus' Ethics, he likes moderation in all things. And, well, basically, this is part of what the Greeks call the golden mean. So the good life and the just life for a human being, both Plato and Socrates say, is a life of moderation, and we'll see Aristotle is on board with this too, but in a slightly different way. And how do we live this good life or moderate life? Well, it's that the rational part of us, the part of us that is most godlike, most, and we'll see this in some slides that follows, should keep in check and rule over the other parts to keep our emotions from getting out of hand, or to keep our, so we don't go so overboard, and become a glutton or a drunkard, or a sexaholic. That we keep these in check. But Plato is not arguing that the good life is the life of an ascetic monk where you deny all these things. But he's arguing instead for fulfillment of our appetites, but in a moderate way, where reason sort of controls and moderates our behavior. Now, when, basically, unlike Freud, this aggressive part of our nature, Plato doesn't think is all that bad, because it's that part of our nature he thinks that gives us things like courage, and the virtue associated with keeping our appetites in check is temperance or self-control, and then of course the virtue associated with our rational element is wisdom. So we're going to see this is how the chariot metaphor comes into play in a moment. But how does the political state then, reflect? How is it mirrored after the structure of an individual? Well, for Plato, and note how very different this is from, I was kind of bored yesterday in my office at Coppin, and I took a look at a website that one of my cousins got up for the family, my dad's side of the family, But, I've got cousins. He was in computers, got a cousin who's a PhD in botany, another who's a principal, But, I mean, my, great-grandfather and grandfather came here, and they were, manual laborers. But in this society where it's a meritocracy, where personal initiative can really get you places, we don't want to be told, oh, you can't do that. This is why people came here in droves, because it wasn't like, in order to really have opportunity in the society, you need to be born into the upper classes. In America, that wasn't necessary. But for Plato, though, you do get some class stratification, because Plato thinks that there are three main classes of people in society. And now remember, he thinks that every person has all three parts of this three-part soul. However, what he says is that there are people in society who are dominated by one or the other of these three parts. And he says they naturally gravitate into occupations in society that fit their makeup. In other words, people who are mostly driven and dominated by the appetitive element tend to go into occupations in society that are involved with providing themselves and other people with things like food and drink and shelter, and even he would include even bankers in this, because they provide. And so he calls this the artisan class, or the craftspeople. Furthermore, he says there are other people who are dominated by this emotional or spirited element. And again, for Freud tends to view things very badly, aggression and emotion. But Plato puts a positive spin on it, and he says, if it's directed correctly, this spirited, aggressive element makes for a good police or, member of the police force, or a good soldier in society. And so people who are dominated by this element, thinks Plato, fit into the military class. And now, who does he think? Remember, I said this is not a democracy. Plato thinks ruling a state correctly and justly should not be left up to just ordinary people. Think about it. In a democracy, remember Abraham Lincoln's old quote that God must have loved the common people because he made so many of them? In a democracy, where's the power come from? From down below, right? From, people in the appetitive class. Where are the most votes? For Plato, that shouldn't be like that. He wants, and this ties in with the forms. he wants rule by an elite few. He calls them the guardian class because they're the guardians of the state. The political state is in their keeping. They rule it. And the people who he wants ruling are philosopher kings. Now again, it's not just that, well, if Plato were a plumber, he would want plumbers to rule a just state, but he was a philosopher, so he wants philosophers to rule. But no, Plato has a story, and it ties in with the forms. If the forms of things like justice and moral goodness and moral virtue are known in this life by our reason, right? It's our reason that puts us in touch with these things, not our senses. Plato thinks, who is more attuned to know what justice really is and to rule a state justly than those who excel at reason and who are more acquainted with the form of justice than anybody else. And so he wants people who excel rationally to be in this ruling class. Now here's where Plato differed very much in the area of, say, women's rights from Aristotle. Aristotle was kind of an old fuddy-duddy, thinks women, aren't as rational as men and can't be. Plato thought that there will be women who excel intellectually, and what he wanted to do was have a program of what we today would call standardized testing, where somebody in kind of their late grade school years would be tested to see where they might fit, and the ones who excelled intellectually would be separated out from the population and from their own families and groomed from an early age to be part of the ruling class. And they would live in like a barracks situation. And now I've got a friend who raises horses, or has from time to time. And when she's going to buy a new horse, she's looking at bloodlines. Even back in Plato's day, they knew that to get the best racehorse, you needed to breed the best with the best. And now here's stuff we would bristle at, and even in Plato's day they would have. Plato thought, well, in the ruling class, we want the best to be hooked up with the best, and we can't leave this to chance or to just let them, mingle and see who falls in love with whom. But he said that here is a case where a state-sponsored lie is morally justified, because he says the ruling elite would pick out the partners, the marriage, and pair members of this class together, the best with the best. But they would be told that this was by a random lottery. They would be lied to about it, when really all this would be predetermined by the people who are already in the ruling class. So very different kind of an arrangement. But at any rate, as people have pointed out over the years, this raises the question: well, who guards the guardians? Because Plato, unlike John Locke and the writers of our Constitution, didn't build in checks and balances. All the way going back to Plato, there is this, what seems to us as an incredibly naive assumption, that to know the good is to do the good. In other words, that if somebody is morally reprobate, that is a fault of education. But if they know the right thing to do, they're going to do the right thing. and it seems that Plato does have kind of faith in this. So he thinks, well, these guardians will know what justice is, and so they're going to rule justly. You know, of course, it was a long time after that that Lord Acton says power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But Plato did know that riches can corrupt public officials, and so the guardians would, I think, be given kind of a state salary, but very modest. And he didn't want very wealthy people ruling. Now, another name for the police soldier class is the auxiliary class. Now, you know, in hospitals, you get the hospital auxiliary. And what does the auxiliary do? Well, among other things, they assist the hospital in various things, right? Volunteers. Well, the thought was that you needed the police and soldier class to help keep the rabble in check, you know, and so they would assist the guardians in ruling the state justly. But now, and Plato was very controlling over the lifestyles of the police soldiers, as even today. You know, if you're in the military, your lifestyle is very controlled. And of the guardians. But the artisans, he kind of lets them alone. For the most part, they can choose occupations they want. But now here's something we would bristle at. For Plato, if you excel at the spirited element, it's actually wrong morally for you to want to become members of the ruling class. So he doesn't want any Idi Amin's or Fidel Castro's or Muammar Gaddafi's military leaders of the state. He thinks if you're meant to be in the military, fine, that's where you're meant to be, but you shouldn't be part of the ruling class. But likewise, if you're an artisan, it would somehow be wrong for you to aspire to be a career soldier. So Plato does have this you know, stratification. But now, how does justice come in? And this is worth pointing out before moving on. Justice for an individual, a just person, is a person whose life is in balance with reason ruling the other parts of their nature and kind of keeping them in control to live a just life and a moderate life. And likewise, for Plato, justice in a political state is the harmonious working together, each members of these classes doing their correct function in society, but with the guardian class, the intellectual class, ruling over the other two classes. So that's Plato's view of a person and how it reflects on a political state. So let's go look a little more closely at Plato's view of the soul. Remember we talked about Zeno's paradoxes and brought up the fact that a mathematical point has no width. And it also has no parts. This is a strain in Greek philosophy that goes all the way through to Descartes and Descartes' view of the soul. And at one point, and I'm pretty sure it's in the Phaedo, Socrates brings up this view of the soul as a perfectly simple, indivisible thing. In other words, the body has parts, and after it dies, it can degenerate into those various parts. But the soul can't, by its very nature, since it's not composed of parts, it cannot dissolve. And it stays the same. And of course the soul is invisible and he thinks immortal. And that's the seat of our reason. And again, for them, the soul resembles the divine. So in the natural order of things, you can see in Plato's view of a state, the intellectual class, those who excel intellectually, and he thought women in this program of testing, if they tested high on those tests, they were in the ruling class. Because he did have to pair these people up. Why should they rule? Well, because these people excel intellectually, and reason is also looked like as a godlike element. The intellectual part of us. So, for Plato, and we'll see for Aristotle, there's a natural order of things where that which is like the divine, namely the soul, the rational or intellectual part of us, should govern over our bodies, but also those who excel intellectually, for Plato, should govern a state. And so the body represents the mortal, right? Not intellectual. Now, there were materialists around, even in Plato's day. In other words, people who thought that there was no immaterial soul in us, that we were just a material being. And that strain goes right through philosophy to the present day. But the idea that matter can think would be something Plato would take issue with. Our body, doesn't have the capacity for thought, and obviously it's subject to death, and it dissolves at death, and it's visible and changeable. In other words, our bodies are part of Heraclitus' changing world. And so for Plato then, in a just person, the intellectual, rational part of it should rule over the desires of our body, our lower nature. Keep our appetites in check, keep our emotions in check. The spirited element being the emotional, the seat of our emotions, the appetitive element where our desires for, various things associated with fulfilling the body's needs are located. So that's what he thinks is the natural order of things in a just or good person. And there's a very similar picture, and it's pointed out in Christianity, where the spiritual part of us is supposed to rule over what is called the flesh. And here it's not the flesh, as it's talked about in, say, the New Testament. It's not just our physical body, but it's the same kind of, the part of us that does have desires, for food, drink, sexual fulfillment, and the like, So there is a similar view, of what it is to be a good or moral person. So compare, then, who we are with the forms versus things on this earth, and you can see why Plato holds that the soul naturally longs to be apart from the body and be with the forms, because that's what it's most like. So if we listed the characteristics of the forms, they're very similar to the characteristics of the soul, right? The form for beauty itself, perfect beauty, or for triangularity has these kinds of, it's not dissolvable into parts, it's invisible, it doesn't change. What a triangle is doesn't change. And so the forms are, like the soul, and of course earthly things obviously resemble the body in, being composed of parts and not reasoning in themselves. Don't ask me what he would have done with a computer. And being visible and changeable. And so for Plato, things in this world are morally worse than things in the world of the forms. As we said, he has degrees of existence. And the form of the good for Plato is the head honcho as far as the forms goes. Goodness itself. It's the standard for Plato for moral goodness, but for Plato it is also at the top of the heap as far as degrees of existence go. Moral goodness is the most fully existing thing. So the closer you are to being like the form of the good, not only are you morally better, but you also exist more fully. So remember, for him, particular things in this world, these are like the shadows in the cave, they exist less than their counterparts in the world of the forms. In other words, the desk exists more fully than the particular desk in this room. And so, to be less than morally good, to be less in existence is also to be less in moral goodness. So, for Plato, this world, the material world, is somehow less perfect and less good, even evil, relative to the world of the forms. And so the soul longs to shed this evil body and be with the forms. Now, something we didn't tell you when we signed up. Now, I'm going to give you a negative at the end of this slide as a positive. Is that Socrates says, hey, you know what? In the Phaedo, where they discuss immortality, he says, philosophy is just a practicing for death. The soul wants to get rid of this, evil body and be where the forms were. It wants to get back there, So, we looked at all these examples of the forms, perfect beauty of itself, and we contrasted them with particular things that are less, real and less good. But how do we get in touch with what we once knew, like Meno's slave boy? Well, again, questioning can bring it out of us, and it's the rational part of us, says Plato and Socrates, that puts us in touch with the forms. We can see only particular things with our senses, like particular beautiful things, but it's our reason that tells us when we reflect on what beauty is, it's our reason that puts us in touch with beauty itself. We can only see particular triangles, but it's our reason that puts us in touch with what triangularity is, with the form, so that we can know what. And similarly, we can only do particular just actions down here, but our reason puts us in touch with what justice and is itself. So again, you see Plato and Socrates both emphasizing reason as something that gives us a special in to knowledge that is even better than what the senses can do. But again, the soul longs, says Socrates, to be with the forms. And, we talked about this before, the fact that we can judge two things as equal, but not perfectly equal. We only have a few minutes. Means that we knew perfect equality in a previous life, like two pieces of chalk. But the soul longs, and this is covered up in part by this, but the soul longs to return to what it is like. But we saw that the characteristics of the soul are similar to the characteristics of the form. In fact, one of the things we used to have people write their first paper on when this course was done at the University of Virginia, and they read several Plato's works, was, is the soul a form? Well, the chariot image, right? The chariot represents reason. You've got a noble steed that represents our emotional part, and you have a lesser ignoble steed that represents the appetitive element. And how do you get the whole thing going well? Well, the charioteer needs to keep these horses in check. And in part, it's the good horse, and here this corresponds to the spirited element, and in society to the police soldier class, that assists the little charioteer, reason, in keeping the rest of our appetites in check. In other words, the noble horse assists in keeping the unruly horse in check, so that the whole thing runs like it's supposed to. So reason should rule, and when this happens, says Plato, when reason rule, we become just persons in this world. And he and Socrates thought that we had a good chance of faring better in the afterlife, because if we seek for the forms and knowledge and be good philosophers, then the chances are our chariots are going to be carried up to where the forms and the gods are after we leave this present body. But if we're held together by our appetites and sort of really into everything in this world, then rather than beholding true being where the forms are, here we join the gods in the invisible realm. But if reason, so again, reason keeps our emotions in check and keeps our desires in check. So it rules over the other two parts of our body, and it produces virtue. Courage, when reason controls aggression and fear, and temperance or self-control. And again, I said a just state is like a just person, where the rational class rules over the other three classes and they're kept in harmony. But what happens if reason fails to rule? Then Plato says our chariots are pulled back down to earth, because and we become like those departed spirits who can't leave this world and who are stuck on it, like the ghosts that inhabit and prowl around tombstones and sepulchres, So again, that's one side benefit to philosophy that we didn't tell you when we signed up, that you take this course and take Plato's advice, and there's far less of a chance that after this life you end up as a disembodied spirit prowling around in graveyards. Hey, you got that going for you, as Bill Murray says in Caddyshack. Now, okay, Plato was extremely brilliant, and many things he said were extremely brilliant. This may not have been one of them, but this is one of those things that you can't make up. He actually says this near the end of the Phaedo, that if we're not going to be good philosophers, then we're just drawn back down to earth, you know, and maybe we become like these spirits who can't leave the earth, you know, after they're out of the body and they're prowling around graveyards. So something to. So and after the test, we'll go into the second part of this PowerPoint having to do with Aristotle. So we'll do review next time. The first, look over, if you have not done so, it's not in a folder, it's a separate document in Blackboard in the course documents. Look at the sample questions and try to answer them. We'll go over them, but it also will give you a model for the kinds of questions I might ask. So, take care. Oh yeah, can I have those posters back so I don't forget? Thanks a lot.
I don't want right out.
So for the aces that we had to do, is just 1 out of 7?
Yeah. I just want you to take one of them. Now you'll see when you read them. There's a little bit of overlap, but just focus on one of them and do as good a job as you can with one. Yeah. So it's not short answer or anything. It's try to develop 1.5 to 3 pages on just one of those questions.
Sure.
Okay. Very good.
I just want to start.
Oh.
Apologize for coming in late.
Okay.
And I got to somebody hit me in the parking lot at 7-Eleven over here.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, a part blew in my engine on the way
really?
here last time. That's why I wasn't here. Yeah, I had the water going out like crazy.
Oh, out of your radiator.
Built-in obsolete. Well, a little part that's the housing for the thermostat, but it's a doggone plastic part.
Oh, yeah.
Melded together at the factory and the thing broke in two.
Yeah.
And you can't repair it.
Nah.
But I did replace it with a metal version.
There you go.
That's much better.
Yeah, and I had this. I was pulling into a spot, and this woman.
But
I'm parked and everything. This woman's back, and then she starts to back up and just scrapes down the side of the car.
Okay, and remind me again.
Chris Muller.
I am so bad
No, you're right.
at remembering names.
So we do the paper before the test, right?
Yeah, and
Papers too.
what I told them is, and I just did this like early afternoon, so if you looked earlier, you wouldn't have seen it. But I put the question pool. Now I'm going to give a printout next time. This I printed out because Haydensville has their test actually tomorrow. But this document, you got the same question pool that they did because it's basically covering the same round.
Right.
This is in its proper folder in Blackboard in course content.
Just pick one, write one.
Yeah, just pick one and write. Yeah.
Okay.
Anywhere from 1.5 to 3 pages.
So.
And it's due a week from today. And there's also a bit of a review sheet. It doesn't cover everything. I found out a little too late that I don't have it covering the forms, but it covers most.
That's great. Anything that can give me some focus. That'd be awesome.
So, and we'll go over the practice test. We're going to just review Thursday, so we'll do the practice tests, and I'll go through some of the stuff on the review sheet, which we haven't looked at in a while.
Perfect.
And we'll just get as far as we get. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Take care. Well. I mean, your vehicle's still drivable?
Oh yeah. She just scraped down the side. It's like on the passenger side, like it's an SUV, so it's like a back door, quarter panel, and then like the panel on the back.
Oh wow.
Because she went into the wheel well and stuff too.
I
had
remember
to sit there and go over information. I debated calling the cops over that.
Yeah.
I did.
Oh yeah, right.
Cause it's like a little fender bender, and she's taking responsibility for it, but. How much
Yeah.
so many people like go, well, yeah, take responsibility there, and then if you don't get anything right now, so we'll see.
Right. They can.
Yeah, they can just say whatever they want to say after
If there's no
nothing
police
not-
report, then
nothing,
they can
yeah.
change. Yeah.
I'm
I
thinking
know
about
what
that
you mean.
now. It's all going on.
Because I had somebody sideswiped a car I had in the parking lot of an apartment complex when I was in graduate
Right.
school. Because it was a pretty old beat up car. I think I just drove
It's
it.
still yours.
The
Like,
wheels fell off.
Yeah,
You
right.
know, just like it was, but I wasn't happy to come out.
no, nobody's having to see
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
It's your car.
So if you found it,
Right.
really.
Alright.
So okay. But integrity, the PowerPoint part of this. So actually, and we're still integrating